Hi, this is Carl from Web Courses Bangkok, and this is Lesson 7, Shapes and Custom Shapes. Shapes is something that we use a lot when we're designing a web page. It's used to make the layout and lots of other elements on the screen. So, let's get used to this really useful tool. The files for this screencast are in your Beginners Web Design folder, Week 1, Files, and then look for Photoshop Basic Lessons. Once you've found the directory, you're looking for Lesson 7, Shapes and Custom Shapes.psd. Give it a double click and it will open up straight away. So, let's get started. Now, as you can see, we have a lot of choices of different shapes. Everything from rectangles to circles, and at the bottom there we've got some custom shapes. The shape tool is on the left hand side near the bottom here, and if I click and hold, I can see that I've got a lot of choices. Just out of interest, if you want to make a square, you use the rectangle, and if you want to make a circle, you use the ellipse tool. That's something that confuses a lot of people. Now, at the top here, the properties bar tells us a lot of information about what's going on with this tool. On the left hand side here, we can see we've got a solid shape, and I want you to make sure of these three icons here, this one is selected, and it means that we're actually going to create a shape layer. In other series we'll be looking at things like paths, and that's not what we're going to do today, so I want to make sure that you've got the first one selected. Here we've got the different types of tools, the same as we found here in the menu. Next we've got the custom shapes we'll be looking at later, and then we've got the different types of settings for the shape. Lastly, we've got the style. Now, if you've applied any effects like we looked at in the other series to a shape, when you do a new one, Photoshop gives you a little bit of help and gives you that same effect on the new shape. Let's make our two first shapes, which are going to be our rectangle. Before we do that, please can you check that you have the right group selected. This allows us to make the new shapes inside that group. Also, I'd like you to use the color black, and I'm just going to click right at the corner here and then make sure that this says 0000. This is important for us as web designers because it shows us the color code that we use when we're actually doing the coding for our design. Click OK. Great. I've got my rectangle tool selected. All I need to do is click and drag, and you can see that the rectangle is appearing. So let go just over halfway, and you can see that's a very simple way of doing it. Now I want to show you something very closely. So I'm going to press Z for the zoom tool, and I'm going to zoom right into the corner. Now something you'll notice about the shape is it's not perfect. It's not pixel perfect. If we look at the border here, we can see that this is pixel perfect. There's no sort of grey area around it. Now the reason this is appearing is because we haven't got snap to pixels. Now this is a little bit of an advanced tip, but it's very, very useful. So I'm going to zoom back out again by right click actual pixels, and I'm going to move over. Again, I'm going to press space to do that. Now for this next one, the square, we want to do it in two ways. First of all, we want it to be pixel perfect, so that when we do slice and dice and turn all our images into code, everything will be pixel perfect and work nicely. So that's what we're going to do first. I'm going to click on the shape tool, and then just below here, this little arrow will reveal some rectangle options. The one that we want is snap to pixels. It's a recent thing that I found, and it's been so useful. To make a perfect square, you need to hold down shift when you're doing the shape. So I'm going to click and drag, and then I'm going to hold down shift, and you can see that that's a perfect square. Now watch what happens if I let go of shift too soon. You can see it doesn't make a perfect square anymore. So if you do want to have a perfect shape, even if it's a circle, always keep your hand on shift. Let go of the mouse first. So let me do that again. Edit, undo. So first of all, I'm going to start drawing the shape. So I'm going to click and drag, and then I'm going to hold down shift next and pull that like that. Now if I hold down shift first, it will actually add that shape to the previous one. So make sure you start drawing the shape, hold down shift, then let go of the mouse, and then let go of shift. Now just before we move any further, I would like you to name your layers. This is a good habit to get into, otherwise you can get really lost. So just double click on the word and it will highlight it so you can change it. So I'm going to call this rectangle. And the one above is going to be called square. Now you'll notice here that the square is above the rectangle. That's something that Photoshop does. Every time you make a new layer, it adds it on top of the current layer. And that's just so you can see it. Now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to be working with a rounded rectangle. Now you use rounded rectangles everywhere, especially in things like buttons. So the rounded rectangle tool is just below here, or you can also find it on the properties bar here. If you look at the properties bar, you'll see something called radius, and the radius just means how much curve is on the rounded rectangle. Now let me just show you a few examples. If I draw my shape now, you'll see that there's a little curve. I'm going to go to Edit, Undo. Now if I change this to maybe 50, you can see that that curve gets much bigger. So it depends on how much curve you want on your shape. For us in this example, we just want to use 10. So just set your radius to 10. Great. So now we're ready to actually draw this shape. So I'm going to click and drag. I don't need to hold down Shift on this because I'm not making a square. As soon as I'm ready, I can let go, and there's my rounded rectangle. Now before we move on to the ellipse tool, I want to name this layer. Okay, so rounded rectangle. Okay. So now I'm ready to try my ellipse tool. So I'm going to click and hold, and then I'm going to choose the ellipse tool. Right, to do an ellipse, I just click and drag, much like I did with the rectangle. And there we go. Very simple. So I'm just going to name that layer. I'm going to call that oval. And now I'm ready for my circle. Now again, the circle I'm going to need to use my Shift key. First of all, I start drawing the shape, and then I hold down Shift, and it will make sure that the aspect ratio is maintained and it's a perfect circle. Next thing I need to do, I've still got everything held down, I let go with my right hand on my mouse and then my left hand with the Shift. It's very important to do that. It's very easy to get that mixed up. So again, I'm going to name my layers. So I'll call this circle. Now you'll notice that these two shapes are a different color, and I want to reference these shapes. So all I have to do is I have to click on this part here of the shape. Every shape has the same thing. On the left hand side it has the color, and on the right hand side it has something called a vector mask. Now the vector mask is essentially just a shape, and this is the color. If you want to change the color, you just double click and that will bring up the color picker. Now I'm changing the color of my circle layer, and I'm just going to choose a nice red. It's about the same. So I'm just going to click OK. Now for my oval, I want to get exactly the same grey as I've used here. I want to reference a color. Now you might reference a color from a photo or something like that, or even a logo, and you want to make sure that the color is perfectly the same. To do that, double click on the color to bring up the color picker. Now you'll notice when my cursor's here, it's selecting a color, and if I do this, I can see that the oval is changing. However, if I want to reference a color, all I have to do is move my mouse to where the color is and click, and you'll see that the mouse has changed to something called the eyedropper tool. I've clicked and my oval has changed to the exact same color. Very handy and very useful. So before we move on to custom shapes, just click OK. I'm going to hold down space and move down a little bit so we've got some space to do our new shapes. Now to select the custom shape tool, I just click and hold, and I've got the custom shape tool here. Now if you look at the properties bar closely, you'll see that something's changed. You've now got this part here. If I click on the tiny arrow to the right hand side, I can see I've got a choice of custom shapes. There's not many, but we can always add some more later. The one I'd like you to choose is just this thumbtack. I'm just going to click away, And then to draw it, I click and drag, and this time I'm going to hold down Shift as well, just to make sure the aspect ratio is the same. And there we go, got a nice thumbtack. And that's just one of probably hundreds of thousands of different shapes. Now if we want to have a different one, say something like a speech bubble here, we need to add a few more shapes. To do that, I'm going to go back to the shape tool at the top here. I'm going to look to the right here for a little arrow pointing to the right, and I'm going to move down and select all. Now it's going to ask me if I want to replace them, but I'm just going to click append. And that means I've now got a big, nice, lovely list of shapes that I can use and choose from. And the one I want to use next is one of the speech bubbles. Comes in handy when you're doing things like buy now and stuff like that. So to use it, I'm going to click and drag. I'm going to hold down Shift again just to make sure it's the right size and let go. So you can see how easy it is to add more shapes, and you can even download them. Again, I want to change the color, so I'm going to double click on the color, choose it from here, click OK, and you can see it's all done. So remember, if you want to change the color of a shape, click on the color next to the vector mask. And again, always name your layers. So I'm going to call this one speech bubble. And this one here is going to be called tack. Now just as a little tip, if you don't know which one of these are, if you haven't been naming your layers, just turn them on and off again and you'll be able to see which one disappears, and then you'll know which one it is. Great, so that's everything for shapes. Hope you enjoy using that tool because it's a really, really useful one. So that's everything for lesson 7 in this series for shapes and custom shapes. Again, like I said, it's a very, very useful tool, so please do practice it. If you want any more information on our screencasts or our courses, please go to www.webcoursesbangkok.com. Thanks. Bye.